Hello there. So in this video I'm going to be talking to you about how to write the perfect Peel paragraph. Peel paragraphs, as you may know, are used often by English students to structure their writing, make their writing nice and clear and efficient. And so I'm going to be using an example text and show you a sample answer about how I would do it for this particular extract. So we're going to be using J.B. Priestley's An Inspector Calls, quite a famous play, to answer this particular question. As I go through the video, you may well like to pause and just read a little bit longer to make sure you cover everything. So we're going to start with this question: how does Inspector Gould use language to persuade his audience that they need to change? So there's a short extract here. This comes at the end of the play. The inspector's talking to this rather stuck-up, arrogant family about how they need to change so they don't keep hurting other people around them. So you may want to pause here. The first job really is to read the text carefully and to come up with a general answer to the question. Now, once you've got that, you want to start looking for examples from the text that you could use to explain why you think your answer is correct. So I've done that. I've highlighted a few phrases in bold, which are here. And once I've got those, I can start working on this, pulling these apart and really explaining how they're going to work. Again, you may want to pause the video here and think about the devices that are used, but also importantly, think about the effect that they have on the reader, or the audience in this case, because it's a play. You don't want to just identify the technique that's used. Think about the effect that it has. So I've done that. I'll show you I'll show you the notes that I've made. You can see the examples here in purple. You can see the literary device that's used, and then more importantly, the effect that it has. I've started to make some notes here that are really going to help me later. So this early stage, before we actually get into writing, is super important. You really want to give yourself a little bit of thinking time just to go through these things. Now, once you've done that, you're ready to almost begin writing your answer. So let's have a quick recap about what a Peel paragraph looks like. It starts with a P, the point. So this is an opening statement that really just answers the question. Make sure it's in your own words. Don't just repeat the question. Keep it pretty short. 25 words is enough, really. And don't put any examples in at this stage. The examiner wants to hear really from you in your own words about how you think Priestley uses language effectively. Once you've done that, you can start introducing the evidence, the phrases in bold that I showed you earlier. You're going to introduce those and then explain how that evidence helps you show that your point is correct. And that's really important. The explain part is really where the magic happens and where you're going to get those super high grades by explaining in your own words how the evidence proves the point is true. And then finally, there's a link at the end where you simply go back to the question and sum up what you've explained and show how, because of that, your answer is correct. Okay, so let's have a look at how that appears in practice. So this is my opening point. You can see, pretty simple. Inspector's use of rhetoric is very effective in getting a message of equality and justice across to the cynical Burlings and the audience. So I'm showing it with the use of rhetoric, shows that I understand the literary devices that are used. I understand the overall meaning of the text. The equality and justice are two big themes in this extract. And also something like cynical Burlings is a nice phrase. Adding a little adjective like that in quickly shows the examiner or your teacher that you understand the context and who he's talking to and why he needs to talk to them. Don't have to do any more than that, really. Now, in the next section, start with a connective first, just to establish moving on now, and just introduce this evidence nice and simply like this. The next part you can see is twice as long as the other parts earlier on, because this is where I get to explain how this evidence is important. So I use a little bit of the literary devices, the polysyndeton, which is the extra and that Priestley uses here, and then really just explain the effect of it, though, rather than just state that he uses it. And so you might want to pause here and just read through that answer. So moving on, another piece of evidence or an example here. Next, another connective at the start, and I then just weave that quote in like this. And then I immediately get into explaining the importance of that. You can see much longer, the green part here, the explain is much longer. Talk about the use of tricolon and how that works. That's the rule of three. The different use of pronouns creates a kind of them and us or their and our effect. So we can see the difference, the effect our actions have on other people. And then a little bit of context, because this speech is really contradicting what Mr. Burling says earlier in the play. Now, once you've done that, once you're happy with evidence and explain, you can mix it up a little bit and be a little bit more sophisticated, a little more ambitious. First thing we've got here is a transition, which means moving from one part into the next. So I start with, as well as emotive language, the inspector uses short sentences. Now, I've just talked about emotive language at the top here, so I'm just segueing or moving from this into the next point, which is talking about short sentences. And here you can see I'm combining the evidence and the explaining section. So I immediately give the example or the evidence and then start to explain the effect of it straight away afterwards. Okay, and as I say, when you get used to doing Peel, it's really useful to do it in this way. It makes it a little bit more sophisticated and it flows better. Okay, let's look at the next section. This final piece of evidence here, again, you can see I combine the two. So start with a connective finally, so it shows that it's coming to an end here. And then I immediately get into the quote and an explanation. So the fire and blood and anguish, almost biblical picture of hell. You see also another polysyndeton actually there as well that stretches that line out. Now, the next part's quite a nice example of explaining, because it goes beyond just the literal meaning and into a bit more detail. You've got the fire and the blood here, physical things, they're concrete nouns that you can see and touch, if you like. Whereas the last part, the anguish, is more abstract and it's an emotion. And so I think Priestley here is trying to show that these things will lead to anguish and suffering if we don't change. And explaining that kind of structure and getting inside the writer's head, that's really what we're trying to do to help us answer the question well. And then the final part here is the link. And as I say, it's pretty simple. A lot of students ask about this, but really you're just summarizing what you've just said. The language devices help make the inspector's comments about society effective and are quite powerful as it comes at the end of the play. You don't need to do too much more than that, really. That's good enough. And it sums up everything up nicely. It wraps everything up, and it goes back to the question, which is important to show how you've answered it. Right, so that's pretty much it. That's really how we use Peel paragraphs. I hope that was useful. If it was, feel free to like or comment or subscribe, and all the very best with your English.